But I chose this topic because I think it's an important one. What do we mean, first of all, by hard? Well, sometimes we mean things that are difficult. It's exhausting. We feel like it's uncomfortable or it's unpleasant. But I also want to remind us that it can mean not easy to break or bend, right? Resilient. And so we're really going to be using a more positive, strengths-based approach to our conversation tonight. Um, I thought about presenting this topic at a time when I was going through my own season of much. I had a family member who was very seriously ill. I was dealing with lots of other stressors. I wasn't feeling so great myself. And yet I still had to show up for my work, for my family, for things that I love. And it was a lot. I was on the struggle bus. I'm sure many of you can relate to having those times in your life. And so in that difficult time for me, I had to remind myself, we know a lot about what we can do when things are hard. There's a lot of good evidence that we can move the dial on that. And so I wanted to share that with you tonight. I hope it's helpful to you all as well. I think we are. Or did you need anything with the Zoom? No, we're good on that.
Okay. And there are restrooms available out in the corridor there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Yeah. So let's get curious about why behavior happens, and some ways to navigate those difficult moments. Because when we're talking about behavior, we're really talking about communication. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about developmental skills and abilities. Behavior is never random. Sure seems like it sometimes, doesn't it? But behavior is not random. There's always a purpose, and we can really dive under the surface and understand that better and respond better. When I talk to parents, there's some common themes that come up, and I see some of you nodding your heads. Maybe you can relate to this. Whatever the issue is, that's hard in your life right now with your child, with your student. We just don't know what the right approach is. Are we missing something? Are we doing the right thing? It feels like we've tried everything. And so that theme of this is hard and I'm really not sure what to do is really very relatable, right? We've all been there. For some families, I hear things like, just the communication that I'm getting from teachers or from this child's coaches or others in their life is just not matching what we're seeing at home. What is that about? Or, gosh, we've got this little one who worries a lot. Maybe they don't talk about it so much, but there's definitely something going on under the surface, and we're really trying to understand that. We've got somebody who yells and argues and throws things and just kind of gets dysregulated. What is that about? That's not our typical behavior. We have the kid who's really struggling just to get anything done. They'll avoid or ignore or negotiate their way around the things that are maybe unpleasant, difficult, hard for them. And it creates hard moments in our lives as well. When it seems to be the same thing over and over, we're getting into some entrenched behaviors and it seems like it's getting worse over time, not better. That to me is the aha moment to say, okay, we've got to really do something different. Just waiting this out isn't going to be effective. We know that the time to intervene is before the problem becomes really entrenched and really difficult, if at all possible. So I always say to people, it's never too early, but also it's never too late, right? It's never too late. So what does the research tell us about what to do when things are hard? As I begin to talk about this, I want to just remind you that this and these kinds of things apply in many circumstances, not just in your parent-child relationship or specific to gifted kids. There's a lot going on in the world right now, right? People have all kinds of stressors for all kinds of reasons. And these kinds of things are a really great place to start when you're struggling. So if you, like me, had gone through it at some point, currently or in the past, take note. What can we do? We're going to spend the bulk of our time this evening talking about these items, pausing, slowing things down. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, that's just fine. You may take a photo. Thank you for asking. Yeah. Yes. And for those of us who are on Zoom, I think you're seeing the slides. No, you're not seeing the slides. Okay.
Share them out. We will share them out.
Things are hard sometimes, folks. Technology is one of those moments. So thanks for bearing with us as we talk about all of this. But yes, what can we do when things are hard? Well, we're going to spend the bulk of our time this evening talking about these primary things. How do we pause? How do we slow down? How do we name what's going on? How do we break the problem into smaller pieces? And how do we ask for support? But I also want to remind you, and we'll talk a bit about this as well, be sure you're taking care of your basics, right? What do I mean by the basics? Are you fueling yourself well? Are you sleeping when you can? Are you moving your body? Are you taking care of the relationships that are important to you? Are you being kind and curious with yourself to recognize, hey, doing the best I can. It may not be great right now, but I'm trying. Being kind and curious with yourself goes a long way. I really like us to get away from I should, I must, I have to, and get more curious and kind and gentle with what we're expecting of ourselves. And when you move in the direction of your values, I think you can't go wrong, right? So we'll talk a bit about that as well. And remember, this won't last forever, right? So Ken Blanchard, who is really well known in the field of leadership, he had a really great quote that stuck with me a lot. He said, people grow in seasons. People grow in seasons, not in straight lines. And I really like this imagery. It's important to me personally to recognize, especially with our gifted kids, they're all growing at different rates, right? Run your own race. It's not about comparing yourself to what your friend or their friend is doing or not doing. Run your own race. We're all developing at our own rate. And to drive that point home, I've got something I want to give a couple of you. Be right back. But somebody who looks like they could use a reminder. Oh, grow in seasons, right? I'll let you guys decide over here. People grow in seasons. So as we continue, I'd like to walk us through a little bit of a visualization exercise. Now, this is a little awkward when we've got folks at home, so just play along, humor me if you will. But I really want to have you walk through a day in your life in a situation that you have found difficult. That's the broad category that I'll use. So if you would, close your eyes. Try to wipe away the day you've had, what it took to get here tonight, and try to visualize just a day in your life with this problem that you experience, this conflict you might be encountering. Really try to get into the sights and the sounds, and the smells, really try to make it real. The more detail you can add to the visualization, the more effective it will be. And once you've really put yourself in it, in that difficult moment, that difficult situation, stop and check in with yourself. What are you noticing? What are you noticing in your body? Where in your body are you noticing it? What thoughts come up for you? What beliefs about this difficult situation come up for you? What do you feel in that moment? And as you open your eyes, I would invite a bit of reflection on that. If there's anybody who wants to share, again, not your specific difficult moment, but kind of maybe what came up for you in that moment. Anybody who's here in the room would like to share something? Yeah.
A combination of feelings, right? Comfortable and full feelings like happiness with certain aspects of it, but then as a parent, the guilt that comes with the part.
Yes.
with
Yes.
children, and then the feeling of hope. Often.
Yes.
It's pretty hard.
Yes, thank you. For those who couldn't hear this general consensus that it's really the swirl, isn't it? The swirl of there's positive and there's negative in there. There's the happy moments and then there's really difficult moments. There can be guilt or shame or anger. Again, hard. It's uncomfortable, right? Where you feel it, what that might be, can be really different for everyone as well. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. So what did we learn earlier? What are some of those steps to what to do when things are hard? Pause. We've got to pause, slow things down. Wouldn't it be lovely if our brain was as simple as this and then there was an on and off switch for some of these difficult moments? You know, we know it's so much more complex than that, right? But we also know that we're not wired to pause naturally. We're not wired to pause easily. And so instead of this on switch and off switch, this reactive or just not reactive, we kind of need a dimmer switch, don't we? Wouldn't that be ideal? And we can practice that skill. Why is pausing so hard? Anybody have a thought about why pausing is so hard? We get pretty reactive, don't we? Especially in a difficult moment. Fight or flight, right? Fight or flight. We talk about that a lot. But not everything is a fight or a flight kind of moment, even though we're wired for it. Breck Reed, who's with me tonight, you have to say hello to her after the presentation, was with me this morning when we spoke to teachers. And she had this great analogy where she talked about, the difference between firing off a text message, how quickly your thumbs can fly, or your one thumb if you're a Gen Xer like me, how quickly you throw off a text, and then maybe things get a little bit confused in the translation. It autocorrects or sends to the wrong person or whatever, but there's that really rapid response versus kind of the forgotten art of letter writing, where it's taking a lot longer to get that thought out. Okay. And the research shows us that if we can teach ourselves and train ourselves to pause, to take that moment, we're less likely to be that reactive piece. And by the way, that reaction time happens in milliseconds. I can't even give you a visual for milliseconds, right? That's the emotional brain. But if we give ourselves that pause, the logical brain can kick in and have the last word. And it takes, 4 to 6 seconds before we can access that. Now, 4 to 6 seconds isn't that long. Let's do 4 to 6 seconds right now. That was 5 seconds. But it can seem like an eternity, especially in a difficult moment, right? So we really have to pause take that time before we respond. We also have to notice what sensations come up. We have to notice those feelings in your body. This is a great visual from some research that was done a little over 10 years ago about where, physiologically, we might be experiencing different emotions. And one thing I want to mention is that as you went through that moment in your life, a day in your life with this difficult situation that you're struggling with, what happened for you physiologically was probably quite different from person to person in this room or those of you who are trying this at home, right? Why do you think that is? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
We have different triggers.
Absolutely. I think we have different triggers, right? There's different things in that scenario that you were encountering that triggered you that would not have triggered somebody else. There's things you've experienced in your own life that impact how you're going to respond. There is your own upbringing, especially in those difficult parenting moments. Do you ever hear things coming out of your mouth that you never thought you'd say? Or, that are somehow, wow, like this, I can also like rely on this nugget of wisdom that I got in this difficult moment. Those things are gold. We also have different temperaments. And I think we have to recognize that with our kids, sometimes you have some that are more temperamentally compatible with you than others. And that is not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing, actually, when you can bridge that gap. But just recognizing and noticing it without judgment, right? Without guilt is the first step. So feelings are information. That's all they are, right? Feelings are not the truth. They are not, going to be forever. They're information in the moment. And as we said, when we can rely more on our logical, rational brain, we're going to be much more likely to respond in a way that's effective in those difficult moments. Questions about that so far? Great. You've heard the term name it to tame it, maybe? Name it to tame it. What does that mean? Well, we know that when we can the more specific we can get about the emotion we're experiencing, the more likely we are to respond more accurately. So you've probably all seen a feelings wheel. There's many iterations of this. You can find them online very easily. You can find really simplified versions of this for younger kids. And you might have the kid who sort of rolls their eyes at you if you try to pull this out. I'm not suggesting, here, tell me what you're feeling in this really difficult moment. I'm saying teach all of this and get more nuanced in the calmer moments too. Recognize that mad isn't one thing. Mad can be embarrassed, it can be sad, it can be enraged, it can be scared, right? There's so many aspects of that we can better understand. I love with little ones, if you're somebody who has a harder time kind of talking about feelings or identifying feelings, that is not your comfort zone. I'm a big fan of the book series called The Little Spot of Feelings. Many of you have probably heard of that. I think it's up through probably around age 8. Great. Little stuffies that come with them. I swear those things are gold. I put those out and kids will talk so much about what they're experiencing. There's really nice graphs in there too. And you can just kind of have fun with it, right? It isn't about always processing a difficult moment. It's learning to recognize these things, for kids, but also for ourselves. Because you are the person that needs to exude safety. And you are the person that needs to be their inner voice as much as possible, right? We know that happens from a very early age. So I love this visual. I think it really does a nice job of helping us understand that. So the first intervention, when we say, what do we need to do? We need to pause and notice what's happening. We need to name what's going on, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing. That's helping to co-regulate. And we often ask kids to self-regulate, like go take care of that, get yourself under control and come back to the situation. And there will be a time for that. But when we're in very difficult moments, we need to be the calm presence as much as possible. Easier said than done, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to talk about how we can maybe break the problem into smaller pieces. And again, the problem can mean many different things. I recognize that I'm talking to a widely varied audience. Some of you have very small children. Some of you have elementary age kids. Some of you have middle schoolers or even high schoolers. Um, some of you have kids who have kind of what we call externalizing behaviors that are very disruptive or impulsive or hard to manage. They're very obvious. And some of you maybe have some kids whose challenges are a little more subtle or a little more hidden. So I can't possibly speak to every situation, but I want to guide us through some ways to think about the different things that we might be experiencing. First of all, remember that every task requires the right balance of competence and commitment, right? We know that we have certain levels of knowledge and skill, and we have different levels of motivation and confidence, depending on what it is. And so we can have somebody who is an top performer in one area, and maybe a very much a beginner in another area. It varies by task. It varies by situation. That balance of competence and confidence also varies over time. So think about the situation that you are maybe trying to process. What might be due to something related to knowledge and skill? What might be related to something around the motivation and confidence piece? Who here is quick to this kid's just not motivated? That's why they're choosing whatever. Most of us are at some point, right? And hey, we're human. So there's absolutely times any of us will be like, yeah, no, thank you. I really don't want to do that. Okay, that's a different kind of situation that we're gonna deal with. But I do think it's helpful to understand that, where this might come into play. And then because I'm a pediatric psychologist and specializing in neuropsychology, I'm also thinking about the brain networks and processes that are involved. So there's different circuits, right? When I was kind of going through school originally, we were all about right brain, left brain, logical brain, emotional brain. None of that is the science. We really do operate, our brains operate in really incredibly complex networks. So think about the biggest highway interchange you've ever been on, and multiply that by, I don't know, millions. Or, think about the maps you see of all the plane flights that are happening all over the country, all at the same time. Now you're starting to get a little bit of a glimpse of the complexity, truly, of the brain. So I start to think about children's challenges through the lens of things related to their sensory needs, attentional needs, emotional needs, reward and motivation circuitry, of course, and social communication. Do you know what I mean by social communication? Social communication isn't just like social skills. Hi, how are you? It isn't just making friends. It's also maybe understanding the nuances of language or the nuances of nonverbal communication. Any of you have the kid who's like not reading the room that that think people have had enough, or maybe they don't want to hear so much about this, or now isn't the time for this really funny thing that you're doing, right? Time and place, buddy, time and place. Um, Absolutely. All again, remember the balance of competence and confidence, the balance of different skills in different areas, the fact that we're all developing in seasons, not in straight lines. So the question we ask the team members that I work with at Center is, using everything we know from all the sources we can get, from talking with parents, from talking with teachers, from the child themselves, from testing, from other data, other points of information. Is there any other explanation for what we're seeing? Because throwing up our hands and I just don't know isn't going to move the dial, right? And looking at it through the same lens that we've always looked at it isn't going to move the dial. If it was, we would have solved it by now. So we've got to look at it in some other way, and that's what I love. That's what I really love, because when we can understand the child better, we can understand what they need, we can respond better, we can improve the relationship, we can, really set the in motion for a much more positive trajectory in their learning and their life. It's my why, right? So I want to share with you a few questions that I really love asking kids. This is adapted from a book called ADHD 2.0 by Ed Hallowell and John Rady. I don't know if any of you remember the book Driven to Distraction from years ago. I really like this updated book. And this is, I call these my magic questions, because these are questions that when I can get kids to answer them for me, tell me information that I am not getting from any other source. Parents aren't telling me this, teachers aren't telling me this. The child, if I hadn't asked these specific questions, wouldn't be giving me this information. Look at that. Asking them, and again, not appropriate for every situation, not appropriate for every age, but what are some things that you're really best at doing? They might not be the things you think they're going to say. It's worth asking. What do you think you're best at doing? What are the things that you most enjoy doing? They may not always be the same as the things we're best at doing, right? Well, I'm really pretty great at math, but you know what I really love to do is, video games. Okay, that's information, right? Um, this is the question that gets their eyes popping. What are some things you do that you spend a lot of time doing that you're actually really bad at? I don't know how many of us have been asked that question, but I think it's a valuable one. I asked myself that. I'm like, you know what? That explains a lot, because I spend this much time doing this thing that I feel kind of bad at. And no wonder I experience resistance to that, right? Think about what that might be for the child in your life. Um, I share stories all the time, kind of in a general way of a child who comes in and maybe they've had a really rough go at school. Maybe that things are not going well and nobody can figure out why, and it just doesn't match up. I had one of those conversations not that long ago with a child, an elementary age child, and asked them these kinds of questions. I got some great answers. I came to what do you spend a lot of time doing that you're actually really bad at? By the way, this is a gifted kid. They're like, well, you know what? I can't read very well. Nobody really ever picked that up or really thought that was an issue. And yet, when we scratched under the surface, we found absolutely that was a big part of what was going on and why the resistance. Now, I'm not saying that's true for, resistance of all kinds, but I do think we can understand a lot from asking these kinds of questions. Asking kids, what brings praise in your life too. And sometimes the things that they get praised for aren't really the things that matter as much to them. We can move the dial that way also. And then this one takes a little time to get into, but this final question: if you weren't afraid of getting in trouble, what's something that you'd want your teacher to know about you? or maybe, your mom or your dad or whoever is in your life that you'd want them to know about you that they just don't understand. And kids are wise. Kids are wise. They'll often give us information that we can really take and run with and shape for them. So I hope you'll consider using these questions as you're working through things with your own littles. Um, can we spend some time now talking about more of the what to do's? So much of what I say in working with difficult behavior is it's about how to be, right? That's why we spend so much time talking about how we regulate ourselves, how we pause and check in with what's going on with us, because we are key. But maybe we're there. Maybe we are in that spot and we can be kind and curious with ourselves and get into what we need for the child. So remember those brain systems and networks I talked about? I really like to think about what are some evidence-based interventions that we can use for kids when there's an emotional component. You see here, this first slide says with talking. Why do you think it says with talking? Do we talk a lot as adults? Do we try to solve our problems by talking as adults? Is that effective for kids? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So we'll talk about both ways that are evidence-based that involve us using some language, and then maybe some ways that are less about talking. So who's here's got a kid who's a little bit inflexible, gets a little bit stuck? Yeah. Very common with our gifted kids, very common with twice exceptionalities. So I really highlight language that uses flexibility. I model, teach, practice that skill with kids. So when they're talking about a conflict that came up on the playground, we can talk about, when you got stuck in that moment, how'd you get unstuck? You can talk about what's a big problem versus a little problem. And I caution you to, be respectful of kids' perceptions, right? What might be a little problem to you could very well be a very big problem to them. Meet them where they're at, right? But then we can start to help them scale it and help them understand, because what we can make more manageable. Some kids love using rating scales. I love using things that are visual. You see all over our office and on the refrigerator at home, how am I feeling? How am I rating things? Try to plug into some language that works for you, that's easy for you and your family. What's your shorthand for those kinds of things? That can be huge. When you have a situation that happens over and over and over, and you all end up doing the same song and dance, we have this conflict, they do this, I do this, and it always ends the same. That's when I talk about how can we have some default strategies? How can we bring them into problem solving for the next time this might happen? Right? Ask them, how there's that situation after school and you do this and I say that, and then you do this, and then this other thing happens, and we both end up feeling lousy. Wouldn't it be nice if we could, maybe do that differently? What do you think might help? Meet them where they're at. They're going to give you something that you can work with. Ask them, well, if this happens, then how would you handle it? Right? Is there a strategy that we can practice? What can we do? What are you going to say? What am I going to say? Where are we going to handle this? Right? Like, you get into as much specifics as you can, even to the point of maybe giving them the exact words, an exact phrase to use that's acceptable, right? Because you're the worst mom and dad I ever had, or whatever their version of I'm really mad at you is. That's not what we want them to say. It doesn't feel good for us. And it isn't really expressing what they really feel, is it? So giving them some, what, we don't use that kind of language. You can say this or this instead, right? And giving them some choice around that. When you've got anxious kids, I think it's also really helpful to kind of preview changes in schedule that might come up. If there's a lot going on that's novel, it might also mean reducing that novelty and, returning to some things that are familiar. So these are some of the strategies I love when there's that emotional component, and we can use language. What can we do without talking? I wonder if any of you use any of this. I know some of it's a little out there. You might not, drop down and do a 1 minute plank. Um, be cool if you did, but you might not. I love just allowing us to reduce the use of language. Can you have some kind of a little signal or something that is your way of between the two of you, and it can be private? That's like, I'm having a hard time now. I need to step out of this situation, or I need help. Remember what we talked about, those physiological things and how things show up in our body. There are other things that we can do too. So yes, a plank. Yes, a downward dog, 20 seconds. Everybody's got 20 seconds. Child's pose, 4-7-8 breath. Maybe you're familiar with that. Breathing in for 4, holding for 7, breathing out for 8. Now, am I going to do that when my kid is crying? No, that's not the time. They're going to say, screw you, it doesn't work. Well, no, it doesn't work because we're too far gone. But if we're practicing and using a 4-7-8 breath in other moments, smaller moments, or just, resetting as we're transitioning from place to place in our day, we can access that automatically. It becomes one of those more proactive automatic signals. I'm also a big fan of Dancing It Out. Dr. Richter, some of you know her. She's on maternity leave right now, by the way. So congratulations to her with her little one. But one of her mantras is when in doubt, dance it out. And, I think if you can use humor and be silly in moments, that can go a long way to diffusing situations as well. Getting outside, I always say, hey, go touch grass, get some sunshine, take a lap, right? That's a really great way to reset. When we can't do something like that, we can do something like eat something sour. Did you know that eating something sour actually is a great way to sort of interrupt the nervous system? So eat something sour, right? Eat something sour. Eat something sour. Holding something cold in your hands. Did you know holding an ice cube in your hands for 20 until it becomes uncomfortable resets that nervous system? We talk a little bit about, I'm a big believer in mind body approaches in working with kids. We talk about the vagus nerve, which is really powerful connectivity throughout our body. Because I'm from the Midwest and I have this little bit of a Midwest twang, Vegas sounds like Las Vegas, right? And much like Las Vegas, not everything that happens in the vagus nerve stays in the vagus nerve. We know, for example, that the gut microbiome is critically important in our mood and our behavior. The research there is really expanding. And if you aren't paying attention to it, I suggest you do. Now, that doesn't mean, believe every wellness influencer out there and what their supplement recommendation is or whatever. But I think, if you really look at some solid foundational things, we do find that there are more allergens, there's more sensitivities. If we can really reduce processed foods, that matters. If you've got a kid who had tons and tons of antibiotics when they were little because they had lots of ear infections, a lot of times that can kind of reduce the diversity of the gut microbiome. We want to kind of get that to be back into balance, right? So there are some things around that as well, because the gut, is, as I said, powerfully important with emotion. You've had at some point in your life that sinking feeling in your gut, that sick feeling in your gut, or you've had a gut instinct about something. There's a reason those terms are in the vernaculars, because it really does make this really important passageway. So when kids are talking about stomach aches or headaches, or they're having, some stomach issues, believe them. And we don't always know what's the chicken or the egg, which came first, the stomach issue or the anxiety, or the anxiety led to the stomach issue. But either way, we really want to target both of those if we're working with a child. Um, I love things like Insight Timer, other kinds of meditations that you can use. Kids really love Zen Den and some others as well, little ones. I think another thing that can get us outside of our own heads is doing something kind for someone else, recognizing that, when we're having a hard time, if we can do something nice for someone else, that benefits us as well. And then a big thing that I think, especially with kids who are anxious and avoiding things, is teaching them that they are resilient. They can do hard things. Do it scared. Do it anyway. I believe in you. I'm here to support, right? I think that's really important. Um, Sensory interventions. I want to talk a bit about that. I recognize that there are some common triggers that most of you can relate to some of these. Unstructured time can be a problem. Ambiguous situations where it's not clear what exactly is going to happen. Transitions. The child who's had a lot of screen time and now we're coming off of that screen time. And who are you now? As well as, things in school like specials, different teachers, different behavioral expectations, different classrooms, what's happening in the cafeteria, recess. Another big trigger for kids is their handwriting and the act of writing. Lots of them, right? The list goes on here. I want to say just a couple of things about this. I want to say, number one, fidgets have their place, but they're kind of limited in terms of their utility, especially in a classroom setting. They can be more distracting than helpful, or get misused, right? And honestly, the literature, again, talking about evidence-based, the literature isn't very, very supportive of fidget toys as a sensory intervention. What can be more helpful is adjusting the environment. I don't know about you, but if you've got a kid who's having a hard time with bedtime, if you starting to shut off almost all the lights in the whole house, or there's different music or whatever is going on, all the screens are off, you're changing the environment. You're giving them that signal, oh, things are different now, right? The witching hour for me a lot of times is after school, after other activities. It's been a long day. Everybody's busy. You're coming home from work. Everybody needs to be fed. Everybody needs to get ready, get homework done. Everybody needs to get to bed. There's a lot going on. That can be a really miserable time for families, right? So thinking ahead, planning ahead, what am I going to need in that period of time? How can I get more support? How can we reduce or eliminate some of these triggers? I think those are just, those are things that just really make sense, right? And I'm a big believer in mindfulness, teaching and practicing mindfulness. I've been doing this for a long time. And when I first started, very few people understood anything about mindfulness or meditation. Now, of course, it's very widespread. We know a lot. It's being used by the military, by business leaders. It's pretty embedded in schools and just all over, right? And there's a reason for that. It's very effective. It's not effective as an intervention to make you calm down. Okay, let me be crystal clear about that. It's effective as a thing to do to help you have some equilibrium in your day. Right? So it's not something to kind of impose on a child in a difficult moment. It's a thing to practice over time. And again, the more we practice, what we practice grows stronger, right? And it matters. So I have here just a couple of things. These are great with little ones. There's typically a progression in learning to practice mindful meditation. We start with mindful noticing. For little ones, it might be as simple as what's listed here on the screen. Looking around the room, what do you notice, right? Maybe closing your eyes, listening for those sounds. We can do, if you've got somebody that's not going to work for them, you can do a lot with the mindful body. Squeeze and release, squeeze and release, squeeze your hands tight as you can, tight as you can. Same with your legs, different parts of your body, and really kind of do a progressive muscle relaxation, right? You don't need a script. It doesn't have to be perfect and beautiful. You can just kind of do some very simple, brief things to reset. When we're able to manage our body a little bit better, we can also then use some mindful breathing techniques. And there's really simple ones that we can use with children, just even as simple as putting a teddy bear on your belly and laying on your back and watching that teddy bear rise and fall with your breath. 4-7-8 breath. I've got some cards back here if you want to practice that or use that for yourselves. I think that's helpful. And then the last one I'll mention is, really when we get into noticing our thoughts. Lots of different metaphors for what we can do there. Thoughts are like bubbles, right? They form, they get bigger, and then they float away. Or thoughts are like the weather. It's constantly changing. Maybe not so much in Arizona. Maybe that's not the metaphor here, but just recognizing that, there's many different ways. Thought, again, feelings are information, feelings are temporary. I want to briefly talk about some motivational interventions, helping kids understand what's a have to versus a want to versus a I love to. And how can we pair more of the I want tos and I love tos with the have tos, right? Calling that out specifically, I think, can be very valuable. And kids can, again, when we're naming it, we're shifting into a different approach. Using a behavioral nudge, build some momentum. What are we looking for? Praising what it is we want them to be doing just as they're getting started doing it. Oh, I thank you so much for helping me clean up. I really appreciate that. They haven't touched a thing, but now they will because you just gave that nudge. Thank you so much for helping me clean up, right? Timers can be effective for some kids. Again, not in a threat, not in a countdown, but just in a, hey, 2 minutes. Let's just knock this out. 2 minutes. When you've got a kid who's stressed about homework, oh, this is going to take forever. Really? You think so? Like, what do you mean by forever? How long do you think? I don't know, an hour. Okay, let's find out. Let's time it, right? And set a timer and see how long it takes them, and then report back on that data. Huh, we thought it was going to take an hour. Actually, it took 20 minutes. How about that? Right? Gathering information in that way can be helpful motivationally as well. Of course, we got to set ourselves up for success by scheduling activities at times that, work for us. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to do my deepest cognitive work at, 7 p.m. I'm not. So when is my time? What's that like for you? What's that like for your child? What's that like for you in context of the rest of your family? If you've got multiple kids and they're different ages and different needs, how can I manage that? Thinking ahead for those kinds of things can be helpful as well. I want to start to wrap us up by thinking about the fact that what we're giving our attention to matters. And it shapes how we offer support. It shapes how we ask for support. So if you can bring yourself back for a minute to the visualization exercise, to that hard thing you were experiencing, what was the story you were telling yourself about that? What does it mean that you did this thing or didn't do this thing? Or the other person did this thing or didn't do this thing? Try to create positive assumptions. Really believe a lot can change and shift if we just say, you know what? Kids do well if they can. I really genuinely believe that. Kids do well if they can. And so if we're not doing well, there's some mismatch between the expectation or skilled that hasn't developed yet and we're going to figure this out together. So in difficult moments, when times are hard, I think you got to ask for help. You got to ask for support. Think about who else is on your team, whatever that means for your family, your extended family, your friends. Who can you talk to in your school? How are you going to communicate with teachers? How are you going to build a relationship, right? Think about what teachers are taking in every day. Be really thoughtful, really collaborative. Reach out. What's the best way for us to talk? I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'd really love for us to just put our heads together. Here's a few things I found that help my child at home. I'm wondering what you've been finding that helps at school. Maybe there's some crossover there. I think if our child knows that we're talking, that's going to be helpful also, right? Believe teachers when they tell you something. Believe your child when they tell you something, but always confirm. Always get all the facts right before you react. And so just know that you've got to ask for support, but ask for it collaboratively. We're in it together, right? This I'm not going to have a lot of time for tonight. I will say that this is a whole presentation in and of itself. Did you know that you can train your attention and awareness? Did you know that you can strengthen working memory skills? And it doesn't have to always be fancy programs or even medication. Research is pretty clear that 40 minutes of exercise can be as effective as stimulant medication for some individuals, right? Now, I'm not advocating one way or the other for any of that, but I'm saying no, that there are lots of ways to train and strengthen these skills. The Harvard Center for the Developing Child, there's some really great executive function skills there, and you'd be surprised, they're grouped by age range. You'd be surprised to find that many of them are very easy, very doable, and they can be things like playing board games or playing card games with your kids or being involved in music or dance or martial arts, or even team sports if your kid is in a good place to do that. So these things actually do move the dial on improving those skills. And there's ways that we can do that in the classroom as well. But I want to wind us down by saying, hey, remember to take care of your basics. Are you fueling yourself well? Are you getting exercise, movement in ways that helps you? Those things are critically important. We're never our best selves when we're running on empty. We know that. Recognize that. Be kind and curious with yourself. Know that no one's perfect. We're doing the best we can. We're in it together. I think the message that we're in it together with our child goes a long, long way. And I want to say you can never go wrong if you're moving in the direction of what you value. Really thinking about what are my values, what are our family's values, and articulating that. Think of it as your North Star because it's going to help you in your decision making. What's just the one small next step that I need to do in this hard situation can really move the dial. I really love this. This is from the University of Michigan, some experiments that you can use to kind of explore your own values. Somebody was doing a story on you. What would they say? How would you want them to describe you? If you could read the mind of somebody who's really important to you, uh, they're thinking about you. What are they thinking about you? I'm that morbid person who, thinks about when I'm on my deathbed, what's really going to matter? And I know it sounds silly, but it really is a powerful question for me personally, right? Does this really matter in the big scheme of things? Is this really important? When I'm at the end of my life, is this something I'm going to be proud of or feel okay about? Right. So whatever that is, whatever exercise works for you, I really encourage you to do that for yourself because I think it helps you find your way forward. Your values relate to many different areas of your life. Recognize that they are not goals that you can attain. They are constantly moving in that direction. And you might be doing well in some of these areas and not so well in other areas. So as you look around this wheel and think about these, where could you maybe move the dial a little bit? Don't have to crush it. If it's a scale of 1 to 5 and you're at a 1 right now, that doesn't mean I'm aiming for a 5, a month from now. But can I get to a 2? Can I get to a 3? Is this something that's important enough to me that I want to make that change? I think that goes a long way. So with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I hope that this left you feeling maybe a little lighter, maybe a little more hopeful, or at least having, a new idea or two that you can take and run with. We're going to wrap up the Zoom here in a minute. If there's any questions, I don't know if there's questions in the chat or any questions from the audience. Yeah, absolutely. So if you Google Harvard University Center for the Developing Child, that will take you to that website for that center. And then from there, there's specific information about executive functioning, including a description, a video, and then it's an activities by age range. And it's downloadable as a PDF in English and in Spanish. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Thank you all so much. Appreciate you. Have a good evening.